human time when the idea of giftedness did exist in people's thoughts and minds? And if so, what point did we lose it?
Of course, you know, as human beings, we're sinful human beings. We've always got it wrong. We're always screwing it up. But I do believe that people who live closer to the earth, closer to the soil, actually do recognise the fundamental giftedness and the connectedness of everything. I mean, I think if you actually grow your own crops, you realise how precarious it is. You realise how blessed you are when there's a really good crop. You know actually that it's the land which needs to teach you rather than you need to teach the land what to do. So actually being hugely sensitive to what your land can do and what it's wise to do. I mean, if you in particular societies, like if you're living in the rainforest of the Amazonian rainforest, you'll know the value and the purpose of every plant there is. There's your medicine chest, there's your food, there's your house building, there's everything. And you are dependent upon it. You're not in control, and you live wisely in relation to it. I lived out in the Solomon Islands for some time, and you know, there, they had a very strict sort of self-determining thing about how much you could draw out from the sea. You really needed to be attentive to that. And was there a particular time when it went wrong? Well, I do believe there's a particular thing about the onset of modernity, and I'm not an anti-modernist. I'm not a Luddite. We can't go back to the past. We can learn the wisdom from the past, but we can't go back to it. But it comes, I think, from that revolution which took place in the early 17th century with philosophers like Descartes, René Descartes, like Francis Bacon, who Descartes' thing was that, you know, I think, therefore I am. The world is out there, and I discern, I observe, but I'm separate from it. This separation from the world. The human beings as a thinking being, and the world as a machine which you can play around with and tinker with and sort out. And, you know, Francis Bacon actually says, you know, we've got to harness it, we've got to conquer the world in order to make it useful to us. We've got to harness it and conquer it and control it because to get the benefits from it. Now that's hugely disruptive. And it's the mindset of everyone living on the earth today, really. Or very few who don't share that mindset. So I do think we've got to move beyond that mindset. And today, philosophers and economists and some politicians recognise how much we have to move beyond it. Back to learning the wisdom from the past for how do we shape or how do we allow ourselves to live in relationship with the world today. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but thank you for that. It's a really important question, I think.
So I spent quite a few years working as a GP in quite a private council estate, and I just sometimes feel as though environmental concerns seem to be a more middle-class pursuit, and as though you have to have enough money to buy organic food, and, you know, frankly, if you haven't got enough money to care for family and things, then caring for the environment just takes second place. I just wonder if you've got experience of working on environmental concerns or, you know, with more deprived communities.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I just comment on a number of things there. I mean, one is, of course, those who are most affected by the environmental crisis are actually the poor. It's actually the marginalised. I mean, we wealthy ones living here, frankly, can afford to get out of it. But actually, if you're living in the middle of the city or the slums of Mumbai, you can't. You're stuck. And you're the ones who are really suffering from it. So, in a sense, I think it's totally appropriate that the middle-class people recognise their responsibility. It's, you know, it is actually our responsibility to work for justice for those on the margins and those who are most affected by it. The second thing is, of course, as a GP, you will know that the effect of junk food on people, on people's weight, obesity and general health is catastrophic. And that, it maybe, the trouble is we pay far too little for our food, generally. We've got to pay more for better food. And we actually do have to work to dissuade and work people not to, just live off takeaways. So you're right. I live in East London. 73% of the population is not born where I live in the borough of Newham. I'm an immigrant to the area, and getting migrant communities really engaged is quite a challenge. But it's urgent that we do. Desperately important that we do. So I don't know if that's and I don't know how to do it. I need this, but there are wonderful. Around in East London, as you might know, in the Tower Hamlets practice, the bow practice there with Sam. What's his name? Dr. Sam. Yeah, you know who I mean. He's got a practice which he says that the fact is that actually medication is a minority part of the doctor's business. The real business of a doctor is to get people living healthier. So he has a community garden. So he gets people working on community projects. So he works on people's diet. And actually, it's a marvel. I tried to sign up, but I wasn't allowed to because I'm outside the borough. But that's an urgency. How we do our medicine. Thank you. Please.
I may not express myself very well, but is there a place for repentance in the church, especially the Christian church, for the way that we have abused communities who may not have our faith, but have lived in a much more Christian way towards the earth, and what we can learn from those if they're not completely destroyed by us so far?
Absolutely, amen. Yeah, I mean, fundamental to this, is the issue which the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople, Patriarch Bartholomew, he says that you will get nowhere without eco-penance, actually recognising that we've got it wrong and we have to change. And so I think the beginning of all that I'm talking about is actually recognising the need for repentance, a need that we have to change, and honest facing up to that. And it isn't just about sort of communities which we've sort of destroyed on the way, very often taking the gospel with us, but sort of crushing all the opposition, as it were. Just the idea, the way we've used that verse in Genesis 1:26, you are to have dominion over the world, to humans. And we've interpreted dominion in the way, in terms of power and control and authority and doing what we blooming well like. But actually dominion is in the way, shape of God's dominion, which is of humility and humbleness and delight and generosity and sharing. So the historian Lynn White, back in 1968, wrote a paper and said the fundamental cause of the climate and environmental crisis is actually the Christian church. Now, I think that's pretty extreme. He did give the exception to St. Francis of Assisi. But, we've got to have a different mindset. And I'll come on to a little bit about that in a moment. Please.
Several years ago, I found a psalm, Psalm 39, and the phraseology really struck me, and it was, I am your passing guest. And that was RSV.
That's lovely.
NIV versions today, it's the idea of sojourner,
yes.
stranger.
Yes.
And here in Norwich, we're very familiar with the word stranger.
Yeah.
We have Strangers' Hall. It was the hall of those who came to Norwich for refuge, basically, at a time of persecution. But I am your passing guest has been, for me, something that I have held on to for many years.
That's beautiful. Thank you. That's lovely. We are passing guests. We don't own the property. There is, actually, in Roman Catholic social teaching, they say there is no such thing as private property, ultimately. They talk about the common destination of goods. We have stuff on loan. Everything. Even if we think we've worked down hard for it, it's not ours. We're passing guests. And learning to live like that in relation to the world is fundamentally important. Shall I go on a bit? Is that all right? I just want to talk about 3 actions which are required, I believe. I've talked about those 3 words of gift, of connectedness, and song. And these bear relation to that. And the first thing is needed is attention. Learning to be attentive. Learning to see. Bob Gilbert, whom I talked about at the beginning, he's great because as we walk, he points out to me things which I would just never notice, particularly the weeds in the pavement. He says where they've come from, what their names are, what their story is behind them, what they could be used for, why they are there. And we're just not good at doing it because we live in such a distracted and busy world. We live all our lives out of these now. We walk along with things in our ears as well, doing anything but just paying attention to where we are, or not just the plants, not just the weeds in the pavement, but the beggar on the pavement as well. It's so easy to be distracted from what's there. What we have to learn to do is to see the world as God sees it. Learning to share God's vision. The word contemplation simply means to gaze with love. And actually we gaze with love on the world because that's how God gazes at us. Actually we live, the whole creation lives within the loving gaze of God. Nothing is too small or insignificant or broken for the God who is described in Scripture. The God of the Christian tradition and the Judaic tradition. And we need to learn to have that way of looking, that way of seeing. Actually attention, any form of attention to people or to what's around us is, I would say, is a form of prayer. It's a form of paying real attention to somebody. Not wanting to solve people's problems, but to actually just to listen, to pay attention. Or learning to look at the flower, at the orchid in the churchyard, or listen to the river, the flowing of the river. It's a form of prayer. Some of you may know that prayer by Anne Lewin, Waiting for the Kingfisher. Prayer is like waiting for the kingfisher. You wait all day waiting for the kingfisher, and suddenly there's a blue flash, and it's gone. But you've glimpsed it. And that's what it's like. So someone said, Seymour Vale, said that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Being generous to what's around us as we receive that generosity. And seeing it in all its particularity, its uniqueness. Everything is unique. There's nothing made which is absolutely a replica of anything else. Everything has an individual particularity. And by its particularity, it actually gives praise to God, who knows it in all its particularity. To attend to something requires a degree of unselfing. We have to get out of the way in order to attend. It's not about us, it's about that person, that thing, that plant, that creature, this planet. And attention isn't just an intellectual thing. This seeing is not just an intellectual thing to gather information. It's about seeing with the heart. The great American environmentalist, the founder of the Sierra Club in the United States, he said, one day's exposure to mountains is better than a cartload of books. It's not about reading up about it. Well, it might be a little bit, but it's actually engaging. And it does involve, of course, engaging with the suffering, the groaning of creation as the groaning of people. It's not all lovely and gentle and peaceful. Attending to the groaning, to the pain. So that's the first necessary thing in living out a different worldview. And the second thing is I believe, is actually recognising our kinship, our connectedness. There are basically three models of our relationship with the world. One is, as I've mentioned, that idea of dominion, which actually is the modern mindset. We are lords of creation. We do what we damn well like with it. It's all about us. It's for us. There's a second view, which actually is in the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 15. It's about stewardship. The man was put in the garden to tend and keep the soil. We have a stewardship role. And actually there's a value in that, as long as we realise that actually keeping the soil, the Hebrew word for keep is the same word as to observe. The same word as observing the commandments. So it's actually paying attention to the soil in order to care for it. But I reckon I believe there's a even more important relationship, or a deeper relationship, which is that of kinship. We have to actually recognise our deep, deep kinship with everything that is, our belongingness. It was said of St. Francis that he had a piety towards every creature. And piety, pietas, the Latin word, is interesting because today it's a sort of a religious attitude, or sort of churchy attitude. But actually, pietas, as it was used in